morning, guys. Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. I brought a new trap back with me from Africa that I wanted to show you guys, and the thing that intrigued me about it was so similar to the trap trigger system that I teach in the Pathfinder School, and there's just a couple modifications that they use over there to catch what they call francolin and guinea fowl. And francolin are very similar to like a quail, and everybody's pretty familiar with what a guinea fowl looks like. And one of the cool things that they showed me over there about this that I thought was really cool, a lot of times when I use the forked stick, in the ground for my trigger system, if you get soft ground, it's very hard to get that trigger system to stay in if you've got a very strong spring, because it wants to pull out. Well, they have a lot of soft ground in areas over there in Africa, especially where these birds are at, because they're constantly digging it up, trying to find seeds and nuts and whatnot. So what they do is, I'm in an area right here in the woods where the ground's pretty soft, and what they'll do is they will just take a stick, if I can find one that's not too dead right here around me, and they will they'll dig a hole in the ground, in the soft dirt, and they'll dig it down, just about 6 or 8 inches is about all they dig it down. If you hit a root, that's not a big deal. You're going to bury it anyway in just a minute. And then what they do is they find like a green tree branch of some kind. We'll dig this out just a little bit more. Got some dead digging sticks I'm using here. Okay. Then they'll find a green tree branch of some sort, and it can be one like this is the one I'm going to use for my spring device. So I'll go ahead and trim it down just a little bit just to get the limbs off of it where I'm going to use it at right here. So this is going to be my spring device right above my hole. Then I'll take another green stick, and maybe I can use this one right here that came off of there. Pretty brittle. So I'm going to have to find something a little bit better than that. Let me walk back here and grab one off another tree. That's pretty green. Okay, so I've got a branch right here that's pretty green and pliable, and that's what I want. And all I'm going to do with that is, it doesn't matter if I've got some tag laying on here. That's a little better for me actually, because I'm only going to use this part of it right here. And all I'm going to do, that one broke, so that was not quite going to work. There we go. And all I'm going to do with that is I'm just going to wad that up, stick it down in this hole, and I'm going to bury it in the hole with that loop sticking up like that. And they bury that down in there pretty good with only that loop sticking up. And that basically camouflages this area with debris, and it also holds that loop in the ground pretty good. Then they just set their snare up the same way that I've showed you guys in lots of videos, with a small loop on each end. One loop smaller than the other, and one loop will just be to put it over the tree, and the other loop will actually be part of my snare, so I make that loop pretty small. Then I figure out about how much cordage I'm going to need, and I usually cut a little extra because I can always wrap it around my branch to take up the slack. So this loop here doesn't matter how big it is, because it's only going to be a slip knot. So I'll put that through the loop just like this, so I create a slip knot that I can put on the limb. I'll put it up here on my limb, tighten it down, and then see what I need here by taking my other loop and fashioning it into my snare just like this. I want my snare to be, about, make sure I don't have any sticks sticking up out here I don't need. I want my snare to be about this big probably. So I've got some extra here because I'm going to pull this thing down all the way to about right here. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap some of this around this tree instead of wasting the cordage, because I can use this snare over and over again at different locations. So I don't want to waste that cordage, because this will become a permanent snare in my kit. What I want when I'm done is I want that loop big enough to catch my bird, and I want this to pull all the way down to where I want it on the trap, which is about right here, so that's pretty close to being about what I want. Might wrap it a couple more times just to give it some good spring. Then what I'll do is I'll open that loop up to the size I want it, and right above that loop is where I'm going to put my trigger. So I'll just kind of mark that with a finger. Remember where it's at. Alright, so now what I need to do is I need to find myself a trigger stick here, and I'll just find something laying around here that's not too dead, hopefully, that I can use for that. Something like that right there probably work fine. And like I said, I'll make this loop the size I want it for my trap, mark that with my finger, come up above it, wrap around it twice, put a 1/2 inch on one side and a 1/2 inch on the other side, and I can scoot that so that it's a little bit longer on one side than the other, which is what I like to do. Just scoot that whole clove hitch knot that you just created down just like that, and then I've got a trigger system and I can cut that off if I want to. Now what I want to do is I want to test it, and you can see it's not going to pull that up out of the ground because I've buried it in there so good. Alright, so now I've got my trigger system on here and it's ready to go. Now comes the trick of this trap. There's a couple more components to this trap that are a little different than the ones that we generally teach at the Pathfinder school. So the first thing I need to do is find a piece of bait. So again, with this trigger system, now you've got a dog bone trigger in here. It doesn't necessarily have to be this long. And like I said, instead of coming in from the bottom, like we teach in the Pathfinder system with most of our triggers, the same T-bone trigger is used, but you come in from the top like you would on a Paiute deadfall, and you wrap it around. And this becomes, at that point, your trigger. But you've got to make sure that you leave this snare loop on the outside and over the top of that horseshoe. And then when you put your bait on the ground and you get your little triggering device, and like I said, you can set this to just a dead hair trigger pretty easy. You just have to finagle that nut a little bit to get it where you want it. And then with this loop, instead of putting it directly on the ground, like I said, you lay it over the top of your trigger system right here and stake it out around it, just like this. So that when the animal comes in and bites the nut and tries to get it out, he gets caught in the trap. And that's what you want. Then your animal's caught. So anyway, I'm Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. I thought I'd show you this African bird trap, which could be used very easily for small game anywhere in the United States as well. Uses the same dog bone trigger system that we teach in the Pathfinder system, and it's just another tool or trap that you can add to your toolbox for wilderness self-reliance. I appreciate your support, and thank you for joining me for another video.